All right, so I kind of enjoyed rambling a little bit yesterday about things that were on my mind, and I enjoyed the feedback. And before I run to go practice the organ this afternoon, I just wanted to talk about something else that just happened to be on my mind. So, overall, the topic is going to be sort of how you conceptualize music to learn better, and maybe some of the problems I think that exist with the way a lot of people conceptualize learning their instrument. Um, and, as normal, no visual aids other than in case anybody's curious, I did get a new camera that, not necessarily for a quality upgrade, which it probably is, but um, more or less so that I would have some extra cameras so that I could do some things that I would like to do in the future with a few more cameras. Uh, Unfortunately, I don't have the editing time for that at the moment. So, to the topic. Basically, this was because a patron of mine, Ryan, had mentioned he had a comment about the anecdote I shared about the YouTuber and his student and his memorization. And basically, Ryan's comment was something to the effect of the guy maybe not really considering the different levels of memorization that there are, because there definitely are. And I just kind of wanted to riff off of that idea. I think a really big problem that happens mostly, particularly in piano culture, is there is a focus on performance um, rather than developing like a skill set and realizing you can do more about that. So um, it ends up being this thing where there is one end goal, and that is to get a piece of music at a performance level, usually a piece of music that's very difficult because that's more impressive, and it's just by whatever means necessary. And you can do that with just a ton of repetition. And yes, if you're always playing music that's way above you, you're always going to end up memorizing it by the end, just because you play it long enough. Yeah, you're going to get it memorized. That's going to happen. But usually that's because you're working on something that's way too hard. Um, and I don't want to even blame the YouTuber who shall not be named, because he's just a product of this. Like, I'm frustrated with him, um, and I guess what he represents, but like, it's not his fault that much. I mean, it is and it's not. Um, he's just a product of that culture, and so much of piano is just focused on that. And people go to school for piano and they do the same thing. They focus on repertoire, a lot of repertoire, and it's very much here are a handful of very difficult pieces a semester, and you have 3 months to learn them. So do whatever it takes to learn those. And if you've got an enormous amount of time, you don't really have to be efficient. And you know what? Hobbyists, if that's what you want to do, because it's just a hobby for you, that's fine. You can take that approach if that's fun for you. I guess my thought is that as a person who works in it and doesn't get that option, I have found that there is, I would say, a better approach. And I think a lot of hobbyists would appreciate having learning more and faster. uh, Man, it's always hard. My brain's just going all these places. But I think a big part of the problem with that very performance focused mindset in conceptualizing what learning your instrument's about, what learning piano's about, is that like, your brain doesn't really learn how to correlate all of the things that are happening. Um, so I want to use a couple of examples of people I actually work with, because there are two ladies who really exemplify this. They are other accompanists that I work with. I don't want to use their real names, so let's go with Nancy and Kathy. Okay, that'll help me keep them straight. So Nancy is in her 50s. She's been playing for a really long time, and she is a very capable pianist, and she's a passable accompanist. She works in that space, and she also teaches lessons. And she's always a nervous wreck when she's performing. She has trouble. More on that in a second. But the thing is, she always finds it just magical if somebody can just sit down and play from chords. Like literally you could tell her, oh, I need you to just comp a basic, whatever. Just put some chords behind these people, because she does a lot of musical theater and she does get asked to do these things. Oh, we're going to play this song. Can you just give us 1, 4, and 5 in C? She could not do that, with her decades of piano experience. Here's the deal. She has the capability. She has all the technical facility. She more or less has the basic theory knowledge to know what those things mean. And if you wrote it down on a piece of paper, she could play it, no problem. But she just can't correlate those two things in her head, because to her, it's always just about, I'm going to sit down and practice this until it's done. Like I'm going to just practice it over and over. And you can tell why she's so stressed out with doing theater, because she gets that big book of theater music, which, I mean, those books are 100, 200, sometimes more pages long of music. And she's probably just pouring hours into it. She does get the books about 2 months out or something. She's just got to be pouring into it. And by the time we're in rehearsals, I used to play on trumpet in the pit that she was in. And she's sweating bullets every rehearsal. She's super on edge. Now, let's talk about on the other side, Kathy. That lady is a great sight reader. She's fantastic. And here's the thing that I kind of wanted to get to, is that the difference between these two people, it's not, college did not make Kathy a great sight reader and Nancy not a great sight reader. The secret thing about Kathy is if you ask her and she just talks about her youth, she'll talk about, oh yeah, when I was playing piano, I'd just get done practicing my piano lesson stuff, and I would just start reading stuff, and it was so much fun. I loved just reading lots of music. And then I just thought it was a game. It was a fun challenge to see if I could read it without looking at my hands. She accidentally stumbled into practicing the way you're supposed to. Large volumes of sight reading, just large volumes of music, probably really easy because she's a kid. And then just not looking at her hands because she thought it was a fun challenge. It was a game to her, and she developed good proprioception because of that. Meanwhile, Nancy, she's a very rules-following type of person, and, I can't confirm this, but just knowing her personality, she would have been the kid that whatever her teacher prescribed her, that is what she practiced, and she wouldn't waste any time on anything else. It was all about meeting that goal. She needed to have that thing perfect for that recital, and any time spent elsewhere would just be silly. Her teacher didn't tell her to do that, so why would she do that? And so what happens is these people go to college, and most of the time people end up going to college and they are taught in that very traditional classical piano way. It's all about, repertoire, 3 big pieces a semester, no focus on sight reading, or very little depending on the school you go to, and definitely no focus on things like comping. And these people graduate, and then you have the people who either survive or don't. Somebody like Kathy, who just happened to have sight reading when she went into college, good sight reading, she'd done it a lot. She can get out there and immediately just accompany and just like, no sweat, no problem. Her sight reading is amazing. She can pick up new pieces of music, no problem. She can learn huge volumes of music. I mean, she will accompany for such a huge amount of people at one time. Like, her workload just blows my mind, what she is capable of doing. It's well beyond what I do. I do a pretty large workload, but holy crap, her workload is next level, and it's crazy difficult music. Meanwhile, Nancy, she just struggles. She struggles, and even if she's just accompanying for a handful of pieces for a choir, and definitely when she's doing the theater stuff, she's sweating bullets, and she doesn't sight read super duper well. But that's most people. The fact that Nancy's even doing any accompaniment is crazy, because most people are going to get out of college and they're going to go into the world and realize, oh crap, I do not have the skills to do this. They'll think, oh yeah, I can take this accompaniment job. They assume because they can play a very hard piece of music, like, oh, if I can learn this hard piece of music, surely I can just accompany at a church or accompany for a school choir. And they get, 10 or 12 pieces of pretty easy music, but they only have a week to do it. And realistically, there's a very specific way that you need to practice to do that. That's very, very different from having, oh, I have this mountain of time. Yeah, you can practice very inefficiently if you have a mountain of time. But if you don't, and your reading's not good, not just sight reading, but your active reading, man, somebody like her is going in and basically trying to finger memorize everything in every piece of music she's playing. And it seems like even decades of playing, she has not figured out how to make her life easier and address some of her reading issues and some of her other issues, and just correlating all of the different parts. That's the issue, I guess. What I'm trying to get to is about how there's so much else going on. You can learn all these things and they all kind of work together. She was taught all this classical music, and if she was taught, I always argue contemporary theory would be the better way, because if you learn contemporary theory, you can look at all of classical theory, common practice period theory, through that lens. But the other way around doesn't work, because if you just learn the common practice period theory, you can't look forward to things like jazz and understand it through that language. So if you learn the contemporary theory language, it's really easy to kind of look back and understand whatever, Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, all those things through that lens. And the thing is, if her teachers had just been teaching her, hey, here's just theory, even the common practice period theory, and hey, here are ways that you can apply it, because she's playing this stuff, she's playing music, and I don't know, let's say she just has some accompaniment pattern, right? You're going to have this Alberti bass. That's going to show up in whatever piano pieces she's playing. If she wants to accompany herself playing any song, she could just use that. That's a basic accompaniment pattern that she can just apply to anything. And if she knows what those chords are, and she knows that pattern, then she can just apply it to everything. She has all of the skills, but she just doesn't know how to put them together, because to her, the only way she conceptualizes music is, I am learning these notes in my hands towards this goal. I actually took some lessons from her, which was a frustrating experience, trying to work on my sight reading, which, yikes. And I thought, because she has actually a master's degree in piano pedagogy, of all things, and she did not help me at all. She's just like, well, just here's more music, learn this. I'm like, how does that help my sight reading? You're just telling me to learn a choral octavo. Like, that's not sight reading. I mean, luckily I figured that out long after taking lessons from her, but, she had lots of strategies, practice strategies, but I realized how much her practice strategies were about locking it into her hands. It was almost never in her brain. If she had a passage, say she had some 16th notes, I'll just play a C major scale, right? Her strategy would be to accent different parts of that, and then to accent the E of it. And it wasn't to build any, like, her entire strategy was like, oh, she just needs to hit those notes harder, all the offbeats harder through a passage of music, every variation of that, so that she's beating into her hand. She has to think about that specific set of notes, that chord or whatever, so that she's accenting that. And I'm just like, man, like, yeah, that's a great way to just build up your finger memory, but like, what are you doing? Like, and it's just sad, because, people could learn more. Like I said, she was taught all of the tools to do this. And so, that YouTuber could do this too. He's got all the skills. I did notice he interviewed a jazz pianist at some point, and he, man, credit to him, because he totally mentioned, like, man, it's like a totally different language. And yeah, it is. And with like jazz or contemporary music, you just have to think about it differently, because you're not thinking about it as, when you look at the page, you're not thinking, these are the notes I play. They're telling me exactly what to play. They're giving you a lead sheet. It's like, okay, that's the melody, and I can play that melody, but I can also just make my own ornamentation on that melody or play variations of that melody. I don't have to play all of those notes. And then they're not giving you any notes for the bass for the most part. It's like, oh, here's some chords. You figure it out. What do you want to do with this? And the sky's the limit, because, okay, so you gave me a G7 chord. Okay, I can play a G7 chord. I could play a G9 chord. I could play G9 sharp 5. I could play a D flat 7 chord and make it a tritone sub. Like, it's a rough guideline, but then you have to understand all of the theory and how to use it. And the thing is, you could be learning those things along the way and just realize all those component parts work together. Anything you've learned from something else, like it all just can work together. And I like to pull exercises out of other things, or like even if you wanted to get into like composition, like you're working on something, and anytime you see an idea that you like, just steal it, write it down, make a note. Oh, I like that accompaniment pattern. Oh, I like that chord progression. Like, let me figure out what that is and write it down. Or then from a practical standpoint, one of the things I love to do is like, oh man, I just suck balls at playing this particular accompaniment pattern. I keep running into it. How about I write that down and make an exercise, and I'll practice through it so that it's not a technical hurdle for me. But yeah, I guess I hate the word holistic because it sounds so wooey, and it tends to be attached to alternative medicine type stuff. But no, like I think with piano, the real meaning behind that, yeah, you should take a holistic approach to learning, so that you're thinking about all of the ways that things connect. It's just a whole web of ideas. So just I would just say, don't think the only end goal is to get these notes that are on this page and play them exactly perfectly in your hands. Like that's not really the goal. You're learning all the time while you're working on it. And honestly, as a point of motivation, this is a thing I struggle with, not personally, and that's the problem. I struggle with helping other people who have trouble with motivation because I don't have that much trouble with motivation. I am largely intrinsically motivated, and I think most hobbyists are too, to some degree. But I'm also extrinsically motivated. My reputation and my paychecks depend on how well I play, so that helps force me to practice even when I don't feel like it. But no, like, what was the point I was trying to make with that? I'm not great at suggesting motivation, but one thing about this is once you realize that every little thing you're doing is working toward making you a better musician, then you can just feel motivated about that. Let's be a little clearer about what I'm saying. If you're learning a piece of music, you don't have to finish it. You learned every time that you sat down and practiced on that, you got one step closer, and maybe you never learned that piece of music, but you got a little better at all the technical things that are involved in that. Maybe your brain just got a little better at connecting certain dots. Maybe you thought about some chords differently. Maybe you just are figuring more things out. It's not a zero-sum thing. It's not I performed this perfectly at a recital or at an exam, or I learned zero things. And I think a lot of people, they get very frustrated with themselves and disappointed. There was a Reddit thread some time ago where somebody was they felt like they were giving up because they were working, I think, through some book, and they just weren't feeling it, and they just wanted to walk away, but they didn't want to feel like a quitter. Walk away. It's fine. A piece that's too difficult for you, don't feel like a completionist. Walk away. Like, I get it. I'm totally, when it comes to playing games, man, I'm a completionist. I've just, to a fault, I grew up with a lot of RPGs, and I'd get real completionisty about that stuff. Yoshi's Island, Super Mario 2 on Super Nintendo, man, that is a brutal game to be a completionist on. And man, I did. Total aside there. But yeah, I get the completionist mindset. But sometimes you just have to let it go and realize you need to walk away. And I don't know. I find it motivating to realize that even if I don't finish a thing, I have made progress in my overall skills. Something sunk in. So like every time you're playing, if you're putting any amount of focus into it, you're getting something out of that practice session. So don't feel defeated. But but that also means that you need to be focusing and paying attention to something in your practice. And I think that that's something that can start to lag if your only goal is to get something to a performance level. You're playing something that's really hard and you're just repeating it over and over and over again just because you have to get it under your fingers. And maybe you start to tune out and you're not thinking about it in a way that is helping you develop and connect the dots, which, kind of Nancy's problem. And I run into that now. I actually thought about talking about at some point some strategies that I'm using right now because I have lots of deadlines. I have some really intense ones right at the moment that are way too much volume of music, and so I have to resort to these sort of terrible strategies that I don't like to use. They work to meet that goal that I need to have these large number of pieces performable by this certain date. And yeah, I can get to that goal by doing these things, but a lot of times that comes at a pretty heavy cost. It means that I'm not as mentally engaged during my practice. I'm spending a lot of repetition time. That's a very time-wasting thing. You know, I talked about the junk volume idea, that there ends up being a lot of that where just because you hit diminishing returns, like I'm going so far, I'm trying to hit the needle just all the way to the end, and I'm just repeating things so much sometimes, and I'm doing other things. There's just practice strategies that I don't recommend. But you know, we'll talk about some of them because they are, at some point I'll talk about them because they are good polishing strategies in some cases, and even some of the strategies I don't like working backwards. I don't like that as an overall practice strategy, but it's a good polishing strategy. And part of the reason that people who recommend that do recommend it is because they are at such a level with their instrument that it works for them. They don't need to really think about that. It's something I talk about with my wife lately, and I've talked about it a lot because, like, when I play trumpet, yeah, I could just do that. I'll just play through. I'll play through my mistakes. You know, I'll hit a piece a couple of times, and it's good enough. Like, I can get it there because I was good enough technically to just play through it a couple of times, and yeah, I'll just iron it out the next time and not really do any focused practice in sections. But that's something I do have to do on piano. And my wife has taken a gig where she's playing a lot more flute than she used to. She's a woodwinds doubler, and she's okay at flute, but she's taken a real serious gig that has a lot of serious flute playing, and she's had to like start incorporating some of these strategies because she's weaker at that instrument. But I think people who aren't familiar with what it's like to be a beginner again, they're really bad at giving those sorts of structured advice, and a lot of their advice doesn't work. You know, and to relate that to weightlifting, just briefly, that's totally a thing in weightlifting too, where there are things that work for more advanced lifters that don't necessarily work for beginners. You should not, if you're just starting weightlifting, you shouldn't go look to some juiced up bodybuilder and try to copy their program, because that is going to fail you miserably. And you're going to hurt yourself, or, you know, whatever. Those people are enhanced, you know, they're taking the roids and a whole cocktail of other things, but also they just have years of experience, not without the drugs even. It's the years of experience. They know what they're doing. They've dialed things into a certain level. And it's the same thing with musicians. They are at a level where there are advanced strategies that work for them, but they recommend them to beginners and don't, or just intermediate players or hobbyists, and they don't realize that like those don't work for those people. But anyway, I need to go practice organ, but I did enjoy rambling a little bit, and just throwing a little more color on Ryan's comment. So thanks for that.